Hello there, and welcome to Lecture 3 of Unit 5, Imperialism. Our topic today will be politics from 1896 through 1916. We're going to go through and look at the presidents that were in office during this time period and analyze the accomplishments and what they added to this idea and this period of imperialism in which the United States was striving to become the most powerful nation in the world. First, let's take a look at President William McKinley. He was elected in 1896 and reelected in 1900. McKinley was really the first major imperialist president. He was a Republican, and he definitely believed in expansion, especially in terms of growing the economy and establishing new markets for American industrial growth. So the first thing that McKinley did in terms of imperialism was he annexed Hawaii after President Grover Cleveland, the Democrat in office before him, had refused to do so. So Hawaii was annexed in 1898. McKinley was also the president that led the United States into war against the Spanish in 1898. Now, McKinley did not declare war on Spain. He left that up to Congress, which is the only time that's ever happened. In all the other wars the United States has been involved in, the president has declared war and asked for congressional approval. With the Spanish-American War, William McKinley wanted Congress to take action, and Congress obviously did. And through the Spanish-American War, we've already gone over that the United States acquired the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico. William McKinley was reelected in 1900 and unfortunately assassinated in 1901 by a disgruntled immigrant in Tennessee. Now, William McKinley's vice president took over, and that would be Teddy Roosevelt. And remember, Teddy Roosevelt had made a name for himself during the Spanish-American War when he led a group called the Rough Riders to victory at San Juan Hill. And after that, he was elected as a governor of New York, and he was very active. He was a Republican, but he wasn't a conservative Republican. He was more moderate, and he did many things that were aligned with the Progressive Party, which we'll talk about in an upcoming unit. And many of the conservative Democrat or conservative Republicans were a little bit fearful of Teddy Roosevelt, especially in New York, where he was making dramatic changes in the state of New York as the governor. And so someone came up with a brilliant idea. Maybe we should support him as vice president, to be vice president, running with McKinley in 1900. And we all know that the vice president has, very little power. And so some of the conservative Republicans urged Roosevelt to run as vice president in order to get him out of New York and maybe take some of the power away from him. But little did they know that McKinley would be assassinated in 1901 and Roosevelt would become president. And when Roosevelt became president, he was the first president to play a major role in world affairs. The very first thing he did, he had a background in the Navy. He was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and he believed that, with Alfred Mahan, that the Navy was important to the U.S. domination. So he built up the U.S. Navy to a place that it had never been before. He built what he called the Great White Fleet. He sent it on a world tour kind of to show off to the rest of the world this new Navy the United States had acquired. Roosevelt would take the power of the presidency to new heights. He had a philosophy called big stick diplomacy, in which he once gave a quote saying that you needed to speak softly but carry a big stick and you will go far. Basically what he meant by that was, he's not going to, talk a lot. Actions speak much louder than words, and he was very aggressive, and he took action, and he was involved in many things, and he significantly increased the power of not only the presidency, but the power of the United States of America. One of the things that Roosevelt did was kind of support the Panamanian Revolution in Colombia in order to get the United States the access and the ability to build the Panama Canal. Roosevelt also came up with the Roosevelt Corollary. During this time, the United States was very interested in protecting the empire around the United States. The Monroe Doctrine had been written way back in the 1820s and never really enforced because the United States didn't have the power. So the Roosevelt Corollary was an extension of the Monroe Doctrine, stating the United States would intervene in Latin America if European countries tried to gain a influence there. So kind of the Roosevelt Corollary is kind of the Monroe Doctrine maybe with a gun, because now the United States did have the power to have the ability and the power to enforce the Monroe Doctrine, and as we saw in the Spanish-American War, they would, be willing to do so. And Roosevelt and the following presidents, Taft and Wilson, sent troops to Nicaragua and Honduras and many countries in Latin America in order to maintain U.S. economic interests down there. Now, Roosevelt was not only involved in Latin America. Russia and Japan were at war in the early 1900s, and Roosevelt didn't think that this was all that great of an idea, so he called the leaders of Russia and Japan to a meeting in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and they came and they had a meeting, and he kind of facilitated an agreement to end the war. And as a result of this, Roosevelt was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. The whole goal of United States imperialism at this time, one of the major goals and the major reason the United States was interested in expansion, was for economic interests and finding markets for the new products that were being produced. And there was no greater market than China. China had one of the largest populations in the world, and China had been controlled by many European nations for, a long time, for many, many, many years. So the open door policy was the idea of Secretary of State Hay under Roosevelt in order to gain access for the United States in China, to establish some trade possibilities with the United States there. Because the United States had been at a disadvantage geographically. So the goal of the open door policy were to break these spheres of influence, which had already been carved out by other major world powers, as you'll see in the upcoming slide. You can see on this map here the spheres of influence that had been established in China. You can see that France had a section, Great Britain had a section, Germany had a tiny little section, Japan, Russia, and the United States. The goal of the open door policy was to break up these spheres of influence and allow the United States to have the possibility of establishing trade relations with China. Well, eventually the Chinese got a little bit tired of all of this foreign intervention and all of this foreign influence, and so a group of Chinese decided that they were going to rebel against this foreign influence, and this became known as the Boxer Rebellion. And these Chinese nationalists killed over 200 missionaries and other whites. Eventually a multinational force, including 3,000 Americans, was sent in. And when it was all over, the United States supported keeping the territorial integrity of China intact. And so as a result of all of this, the United States kind of established a positive relationship with China over the time.
Everybody was kung fu fighting. Those kids were fast as lightning. In fact, it was a little bit frightening, but they fought with expert timing. There were funky Chinamen from funky Chinatown. They were chopping them up, they were chopping them down. It's an ancient Chinese art, and
Now, President Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, decided not to run again in 1908. He had served almost 2 full terms, and he decided he was very adventurous. He was going to go off and go on a safari, do some hunting, and go float the river of no return, take all these adventures. And so he kind of picked his successor, William Howard Taft. And Taft came in, and Taft was not quite as bold as Roosevelt. Taft probably is maybe most well known for maybe the most embarrassing moment a president has ever had to endure. He was a rather large man, and he actually got stuck in the bathtub at the White House. But anyway, he added to this age of imperialism with a new policy that the United States would put into effect known as dollar diplomacy. And it was his thinking that the United States always didn't have to send their military. They could use foreign investment to gain foreign policy objectives. So we will give you, a certain amount of money if you support us on this, if you allow us to have a naval base in your country or access to certain materials or whatever it may be. So this became kind of what was known as substituting dollars for bullets.
I will buy you a garden where your flowers can bloom. I will buy you a new car, perfect, shiny and new. I will buy you that big house way up in the West Hills. I will buy you a new life. Yes, I will.
Taft was not all that popular with the Republican Party. He was a fairly effective president, but Teddy Roosevelt wasn't happy with the job that Taft was doing. So in 1912, Teddy Roosevelt came back and ran again. He did not receive the Republican nomination. It went to Taft because he was the sitting president. And Taft ran as a member of a third party called the Bull Moose Party, which was progressive. And we'll talk about that more in the next unit. But the impact that had was it split the Republican vote and allowed Woodrow Wilson, only the second Democrat since 1860, to be elected. Now, the Democrats had a far different idea of what imperialism should be and so forth. Wilson was kind of could not believe some of the things that had occurred, that the United States had done during the age of imperialism thus far under the leadership of the previous Republican presidents. He came up with what was called moral diplomacy, and he wanted to deal with nations upon equality and honor, use diplomacy, treaty making to gain foreign policy objectives, not to be a bully, not to throw our military power or money around. And obviously this probably was not as successful as the others. He was trying to maybe gain back some of the reputation of the United States that had been lost during the previous 20 years or so. He did purchase the Virgin Islands in 1917. He did send forces to Mexico, Haiti, and Nicaragua. So it wasn't like he was completely against, or he didn't act completely against what some of the previous presidents, the policies that they had established. He spoke against it, and he would eventually lead the United States into World War I, which will be our next unit. So wrapping up this unit, the United States went, during this time period, became probably the most dominant nation in the world by establishing empires, finding markets for their supplies, finding raw materials, and competing with the other foreign powers in establishing empires in order to become more powerful.